Clara Cole stepped out of the revolving glass doors of Smith Enterprises, the early morning sunlight catching on the streaks of tears she had been holding back for too long, her resignation letter still trembling in her hand like a cruel reminder. She walked quickly, almost blindly, through the stream of suited workers rushing in, clutching her bag against her chest as though it were armor. She had promised herself she would never let him see her break, never let Adam Smith have that victory. But now, outside the steel and glass tower that had swallowed her dreams whole, she felt the ache spread through her chest like a wound that refused to close. Her heels clicked against the marble steps, but her legs wavered, the humiliation of it all weighing her down. One moment she had been translating flawlessly in a boardroom filled with investors, and the next, an official email had arrived, cold and final. Her resignation approved by the CEO himself, her name erased with a single stroke of his pen. No explanation, no chance to fight, no choice. She had walked into his office to demand an answer, only to find him standing there with his hands in his pockets, expression unreadable, voice as cold as the glass walls surrounding him. "It's better this way," he had said, like those 4 words were enough to end everything. The city noises around her blurred, horns blaring, people talking, life rushing on, while she stood in the middle of the sidewalk trying to remember how to breathe. Her heart whispered questions she didn't dare ask out loud. Why had he done it? Why end things so abruptly, after all the tests, after all the challenges, after that moment on the balcony when she had seen the cracks in his armor, the grief he tried to bury? She thought they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but maybe she was wrong. Maybe Adam Smith had never let her in at all, yet Benia. The sting of betrayal? Another part of Clara rose stubbornly, the part of her that had survived humiliation on her first day when she walked into the wrong restroom and found the CEO wrapped in a towel, the part that had stood in front of foreign investors and corrected a $1 million mistake without hesitation, the part that refused to crumble no matter how many times he had tried to push her away. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, straightened her shoulders, and told herself that she would not let him see her broken, even if inside she was splintering. Adam Smith, meanwhile, stood in his office high above the city, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline stretching endlessly before him. To the rest of the world, he was unshakable, a man who built empires, demanded perfection, and never hesitated. But his reflection in the glass betrayed something else. His jaw clenched too tightly, his fists buried deep in his pockets, his mind replaying the look on Clara's face when she read that email. The hurt in her eyes when she asked him why. He had given her no answer because he didn't have one that wouldn't shatter him further. She was getting too close to the part of him he had promised never to show anyone again. The silence in his office pressed against him like a weight. Yet he told himself it was necessary. Better to cut her out now than risk losing her later the way he had lost Sophie. Better to build walls so high no one could ever climb them. But even as he repeated those words like a mantra, his chest tightened with something dangerously close to regret. Down on the street, Clara kept walking, her resignation letter crumpled in her hand, her heart bruised but not beaten, and as she merged into the crowd of strangers, one thought echoed louder than the rest. This was not the end, not yet, because deep down she knew there was more to Adam Smith than the ruthless CEO he pretended to be. The question was whether she would ever be allowed to see the man behind the mask, or whether she had just been shut out forever. And somewhere in that high-rise tower, Adam pressed his hand briefly against the glass, as if he could feel her presence fading from his world. A flicker of something unspoken lingering in his chest. Then he turned away, convincing himself he had done the right thing, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his control. Clara Cole sat at the small cafe across the street from Smith Enterprises, her untouched coffee growing cold as her mind raced back to the first day she had walked into that building. She remembered the polished marble floors, the endless glass walls, and the feeling of being too small in a world too sharp. But what stood out most was not the grandeur. It was the moment that had set everything spiraling: the wrong door, the wrong restroom, the wrong encounter with the man who now haunted her every step. That memory played like a film in her head. The pounding in her ears as she realized she had stepped into the men's bathroom, the sound of voices that were not supposed to be there, and then the door opening to reveal Adam Smith standing there with nothing but a towel and a scowl. She could still remember the way his eyes widened in disbelief, the way her heart nearly stopped, and the ridiculous lie she blurted about being there for a sanitary inspection. Even now, the memory made her flush with embarrassment. But what struck her most was how fate had chosen that moment to collide their worlds. She took a deep breath, her chest tight, remembering the way he had looked at her that day, like she was both a nuisance and a puzzle to solve. He had tested her relentlessly after that moment, throwing impossible tasks her way, daring her to fail, but she hadn't failed. Not once. She had stumbled. Yes, she had cracked jokes when she should have stayed silent. She had answered him in German once when exhaustion won over common sense. But she had proven herself again and again, and that was why it earned so badly now, why it felt like betrayal that he had signed her resignation without even speaking to her. Up in his office, Adam sat in silence, the paper in front of him blurred as if the words refused to stay still. He had spent years perfecting the art of control, his empire built on precision and power. But Clara had unsettled that balance from the moment she stumbled into his world. She was chaos wrapped in determination, laughter in the middle of pressure, fire in the middle of ice, and every time he tried to push her away, she only pushed back harder until he found himself caught between wanting her gone and needing her near. The night of the gala returned to him uninvited. He had stood on the balcony while the party swirled behind him, champagne trays weaving through the crowd, the sound of laughter and music filling the air, and Clara had followed him out. He had expected her to scold him with her usual fearless tongue. Instead, she had stood beside him quietly, gently asking if he was all right when he told her he hated champagne. Her eyes had softened with something he had not seen in years, understanding. He had almost told her everything, almost confessed the shadows of Sophie, the weight he still carried, but he had stopped himself, walls snapping back into place before he could drown. Adam rubbed his temple, now furious at himself for being weak. Furious at Clara for seeing through him, furious at the world for taking Sophie and leaving him afraid of feeling. Again he told himself signing Clara's resignation was the only choice, the cleanest cut, but his chest still felt heavy as if he had carved away something vital. Clara left the cafe, her heart aching with both anger and sorrow as she walked through the crowded streets. She whispered to herself, "He thinks this is the end, but he has no idea what he has started." The city buzzed around her, neon lights beginning to flicker against the darkening sky. And in that moment, a spark of determination ignited within her. This story was not finished, not by a long shot, and if Adam Smith thought he could erase her so easily, he was about to learn that Clara Cole did not vanish. She fought back. The city lights flickered against the tall glass towers as Clara pushed through the heavy doors of her small apartment. Her mind was a storm of unanswered questions. She dropped her bag on the couch and stared at the ceiling. The image of Adam Smith's face when he told her it was better this way would not leave her. He had spoken with such control, such distance, as if she were just another expendable employee. But deep down, she knew that was not the whole truth. Something in his eyes had betrayed him for just a second, and that was the part that haunted her. Sleep refused to come that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of their strange history, the awkward chaos of their first meeting. The elevator where his hands caught her just before she fell, the balcony where his voice cracked for the first time when he spoke about champagne and loss. All of it built a picture that made no sense. He was not just ruthless. He was hiding something. Something that cut so deep he would rather drive her away than risk her finding it. Meanwhile, Adam sat alone in his office long after midnight, the city below him alive with sirens and car horns. But his world was silent. The unopened envelope with Sophie's name lay on his desk. He had pushed it aside hours ago, but it kept pulling his gaze like a ghost that refused to stay buried. He remembered the way Sophie laughed, the way she had forced him to dance with her in a garden under fairy lights, the way her life had ended so abruptly, leaving him with nothing but a glass of champagne in his hand and a hollow that had never healed. Now Clara's face had begun to take Sophie's place in his thoughts, and that terrified him. He pressed his palms against his desk, whispering to himself, "You cannot let this happen again." But the memory of Clara's determined eye, the way she had corrected an investor without hesitation, the way she had stood her ground in every test crept into his mind against his will. He felt the dangerous warmth of something he had sworn he would never allow back: love. The next morning, Clara arrived at the office building to collect her final paycheck and walk away for good. Or so she told herself. The air inside was heavy. She could feel the weight of whispers, employees glancing at her as though she had already become a cautionary tale. She kept her chin high, refusing to let them see the ache inside her chest. But just as she reached the elevator doors, a familiar voice called her name. Clara froze. The sound of her name spoken in that deep, steady tone sent a shiver down her spine. She turned slowly to see Adam standing there, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but his eyes fixed on her for the first time since the resignation email. He had broken the silence. "I want to talk," he said quietly but firmly. She crossed her arms. "You made it clear there is nothing left to say." His jaw tightened, then loosened again. "I made a mistake." Suspense clung to the air like static. Clara searched his face for a hint of mockery, for the cold indifference she was used to, but instead she saw something she had never seen before. Desperation. The man who ruled boardrooms without blinking now looked uncertain, and that shook her more than any cruel dismissal ever could. The elevator chimed, its doors sliding open between them. Clara had seconds to choose: walk away and let the chapter close forever, or step back into the storm that Adam Smith carried within him. Her heart pounded louder than the city outside, and in that instant she realized her story with him was far from over. The elevator doors closed with a heavy thud, sealing Clara and Adam inside. Together, the silence was thick enough to crush her chest. Her hands tightened around her bag as she avoided looking at him, but she could feel his presence, every inch of it filling the small space. The tension was unbearable. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why did you sign it? Why did you end everything with one email?" Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. Adam's jaw clenched, his hands flexing at his sides. "I thought it was the only way, Clara. I thought if I cut this off now, you would be safe. Safe." She repeated, her laugh sharp and bitter. "Safe from what? From working too hard, from dealing with a CEO who thinks he can control everyone." Adam's eyes darkened. "Safe from me." The elevator jolted suddenly, throwing Clara off balance. She stumbled forward, her palms hitting his chest, his arms wrapped around her, instinctively holding her upright. The sudden closeness stole her breath. His heartbeat thundered beneath her fingers. His eyes locked on hers, and for a moment, the world stopped. He smelled of sharp cologne and something warm and human underneath. "Something real," she whispered. "You're not making sense." Adam. His grip on her arms tightened, then loosened as if he was fighting himself. "I can't do this," he muttered. But his body betrayed him. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her cheek before anything more could happen. The elevator shuddered again. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into semi-darkness. Clara's pulse raced, her fear of small spaces ignited panic. Adam's voice was low, steady, trying to calm her. "It's all right. They'll fix it soon." But his hand lingered at her waist, anchoring her. She tried to steady her breath, but the air felt too thin. "You always say it's all right, but it never is. Adam, why do you keep shutting me out?" For the first time, his composure cracked, his voice, rough, almost breaking, because every time I might let someone close, I lose them. Clara stiffened. She could barely see him, but she felt the truth in his words, the sharp edge of grief hidden in his tone. "Sophie." She whispered the name like it had been carved into the air. He didn't answer, but the silence was confirmation. Clara's heart twisted. She finally understood this was not about her. It was about a wound he had never let heal. The elevator lights blinked back on the car, lurched upward, and the spell shattered. Clara pulled away, her hands shaking. She pressed herself against the wall, needing space, needing air. Adam stood rigid, his mask of control sliding back into place as the doors opened. He walked out without a word, leaving her frozen behind. Clara stepped out slowly, her legs weak, the taste of that unfinished moment still heavy on her lips. The truth had slipped through his cracks, and now she had more questions than ever. She had seen the shadow of his pain and the flicker of his desire. And she knew one thing with certainty: the war between them had only just begun. The next evening, the hotel garden glowed with golden lights strung high in the trees. The conference had ended hours ago, but Clara found herself lingering on one of the stone paths, needing air, needing space. Her mind was tangled with the memory of the elevator, the closeness of Adam's hands, the almost kiss that had never happened. She told herself it meant nothing, but her heart kept betraying her, replaying the look in his eyes before the lights came back on. She was not alone for long. The sound of footsteps behind her made her tense. She turned, and there he was. Adam Smith, the man who always seemed untouchable, but now his eyes were stormy, his jaw tight. He had followed her out into the night. She crossed her arms, ready to push back before he even spoke. "What do you want?" "Adam." His reply came sharp, lower than usual to deal with a problem. Clara frowned. What problem before she could ask more? One of the investors stepped out from the ballroom, a tall man named Caleb, his smile too smooth, his gaze too direct. He approached Clara, ignoring the way Adam stiffened beside her. "Miss Cole, you were extraordinary today," Caleb said, his voice full of charm but laced with something darker. Clara forced a polite smile. "Thank you." But Caleb stepped closer, his words dipping into something suggestive. "I must admit I rarely see interpreters as captivating as you." His eyes lingered too long. Clara felt her stomach twist before she could respond. Adam's voice cut through the night like steel. "She is with me." The words froze Clara. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Caleb chuckled, amused. "Is she?" "Now?" Adam's stare never wavered. "Yes, she is." His voice was final, daring anyone to argue. Clara's heart pounded, not from fear but from shock. The ruthless CEO who never let his emotions slip had just claimed her publicly. Caleb raised his hands in mock surrender. "Perhaps I misjudged. Then forgive me." When Caleb walked away, Clara spun toward Adam, fire in her eyes. "What was that supposed to mean? You cannot just declare things like that?" Adam stepped closer, his eyes dark with something she had never seen before. "I did what was necessary," he said firmly. "You call that necessary?" she shot back. "I call it arrogant." He held her gaze unwavering. "I did not like the way he looked at you." Clara's breath caught for a second. "You don't get to decide who looks at me or how I live my life." Adam's hand tight, inked into a fist at his side. "You do not understand. You throw me off balance. You make me want things I cannot have." She froze, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. "What do you mean?" Before he could stop himself, he reached forward, cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The world blurred the golden lights, the music from the ballroom, the rush of her own heartbeat. It was raw, fierce, and filled with something she had never expected from him. When he pulled away, his breath ragged, she whispered, "I don't know what this is, Adam." His eyes flickered with pain, then he turned his back. "Forget it." Clara touched her lips, stunned. "Forget it." After a kiss like that, he walked away, his shoulders rigid, disappearing into the shadows of the garden. Clara stood trembling, her heart torn between fury and longing. She knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the office was buzzing with whispers. Clara could feel eyes following her as she walked down the hallway. Some looked curious, others envious, and a few openly suspicious. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to let anyone see how shaken she really was. Every step reminded her of the kiss in the garden, the way Adam had held her as if he had no intention of letting go, and then told her to forget it like it was nothing. Her heart was a battlefield torn between anger and the undeniable truth that she wanted more. When she entered the conference room, Adam was already there, his expression cold and controlled as if the night before had never happened. His voice clipped as he directed the team, and Clara forced herself to match his professionalism. But every time her eyes wandered, she caught the tension in his jaw. The quick way he avoided meeting her gaze, he was pretending, but his silence screamed louder than words. The meeting ended, and as the investors filed out, one of Adam's assistants walked in carrying a cream-colored envelope, her voice casual but her eyes curious. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Smith. It's an invitation." Adam took the envelope and froze when he read the embossed name on the front. Clara noticed the shift instantly, the way his face lost all color, his fingers tightened around the paper as though it burned him. The room fell quiet even after the assistant left. Clara waited, watching him carefully. Finally, she asked, "What is it?" Adam's voice was low, rough. "My ex-fiancé." The word struck like a stone. Clara blinked, confusion flooding her ex-fiancé. He let out a breath as if the weight of the past pressed down on him. Her name was Sophie. Clara felt her chest tighten, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. Sophie, the shadow behind the champagne, the reason for the walls he had built. She whispered, "What happened?" Adam moved to the window, his back to her, his reflection in the glass, rigid. "She died." His voice broke slightly on the word. Clara's breath caught. She took a step forward but stopped. She had never seen him like this. Not the ruthless CEO, not the man of iron control, but a man haunted by loss. He said nothing more, but his silence spoke louder than confessions. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him he didn't have to carry it alone, but his body language screamed, "Stay away." Later that night, Clara sat at her desk, unable to focus, the memory of his broken tone repeating over and over. Sophie was the ghost in his heart, the chain around his emotions, and now Clara realized what she was fighting against. Not just Adam's pride, not just his perfection, but his fear of losing again. He had chosen to end things before they could begin because he would rather cut her out than risk being shattered twice. Clara pressed her hands against her face, torn between compassion and fury. He thought he was acting himself, but he was destroying her in the process. Her heart ached, but she made herself a promise. She would not be a shadow. She would not compete with a ghost. If Adam Smith wanted to shut her out, she would make him face a truth he could not ignore. Love was not something you erased with a resignation letter. It was something that demanded to be fought for. The days that followed felt like a storm trapped inside four walls. Clara carried herself with dignity, but inside she was unraveling. Adam had built his fortress higher than ever after confessing about Sophie. He avoided her eyes during meetings, spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, and left the office each night without a word. It was as if the kiss in the garden had never happened, as if she was nothing but a memory he was determined to erase. One evening, unable to stand it anymore, Clara marched straight to his office. The building was nearly empty, the glow of city lights flooding through the tall glass windows. She pushed the door open without knocking. Adam was at his desk, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But when he looked up, there was no surprise, only resignation. Clara's voice trembled with anger. "You are avoiding me." He set his pen down slowly. "Clara, I don't." She cut him off. "Yes, you are. Last night, you opened up to me, and now you're shutting me out again." He pressed his lips together, his silence louder than denial. Clara stepped closer, her eyes burning. "Tell me what changed." Adam stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office, his movements sharp like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted finally, his voice breaking. She froze. "Do what?" He turned to her, his eyes raw. "I have feelings for you. Clara, feelings I have not allowed myself to feel since Sophie." She felt her chest tighten, hope and fear colliding. "Then what is the problem?" He dragged a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "What if I cannot give you what you deserve?" Her hands curled into fists. "You think—" "I don't know what I'm getting into, Adam. You think I don't see your scars? I do. But that doesn't mean you can't love again." He looked away, his shoulders tense. "I don't want to hurt you." Clara walked right up to him, her voice fierce. "Then, stop hurting me now." She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. His eyes shone with conflict, as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but terrified of the fall. Before he could answer, a sudden vibration buzzed against Clara's hand. Her phone. She pulled it out quickly, her eyes scanning the screen, and then her breath caught. It was an email, an official company statement. Her name in bold. Her heart dropped. "Miss Clara Cole has resigned from the company, approved by CEO Adam Smith." The words blurred as her pulse thundered. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "What is this?" Adam stiffened. "Clara, it's not what you think." She stepped back, her grip tight on the phone. "You signed my resignation." He closed his eyes as if bracing himself. "I thought you would not stay after what happened." Her voice cracked. "You decided for me." His silence was confirmation. Tears stung her eyes. "You always run away, Adam. You always choose fear over trust. And now, instead of giving me the chance to choose, you made the decision for me." She turned her back to him, her voice breaking. "You know what hurts the most? I would have chosen you." He reached out, grabbed her arm. "Desperate, Clara, please." She looked over her shoulder, her face wet with tears. "It's over, Adam." And with that, she pulled free from his grasp and walked out of the office, the echo of her footsteps cutting through the silence, leaving him standing there alone for the first time, realizing the empire he had built meant nothing if she was no longer in it. The airport was alive with noise, the hum of rolling suitcases, the sharp voice of boarding announcements, the restless shuffle of travelers. But for Clara, it all blurred into nothing. She sat stiff in the crowded terminal, her ticket clutched so tightly it crumpled in her hand. Her eyes burned from holding back tears. She told herself this was freedom. This was the clean break she needed from the man who had torn her apart. But her heart betrayed her with every uneven beat. Her mind replayed the last words she had said to him. "It's over." Adam, and the silence that followed like a blade cutting through the air. She wanted to believe she meant it, but a part of her still ached for him, still remembered the way his hands trembled when he confessed he was scared, still felt the ghost of his lips from that kiss in the garden. Then a sudden stir rippled through the crowd. Whispers rising, phones lifted to record. Clara looked up and her heart stopped. Adam Smith was there, not in his tailored, calm stride, not with his usual mask of control, but running his tie loose, his eyes wild, his hair windswept by the rush of the chase. People turned to watch the untouchable CEO breaking every rule of his image. He was not the man who owned boardrooms. He was a man desperate not to lose the woman walking away from him. He stopped right in front of her, his chest heaving, his voice rough. "Clara." She stood frozen, anger, sorrow, and longing colliding inside her. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. He took a sharp breath, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I was a fool. I thought pushing you away would protect me, but all it did was destroy me." Her throat tightened. The world seemed to fade until it was only him and her. "You can't just say that now, Adam. You already decided for me." He dropped to one knee right there in the terminal, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "Clara." The crowd gasped, phones flashing, cameras rolling. His voice cracked, but his words cut through the noise. "I don't want to run anymore. I love you, and I can't let you leave without knowing that. Marry me." Clara's heart thundered, tears spilling before she could stop them. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "You don't get to do this in front of everyone." He smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. "I don't care if the whole world is watching. I care if you walk away." She stared at him, trembling. Part of her wanted to scream, part of her wanted to collapse into his arms. The man who had built walls higher than anyone now knelt on the floor of an airport, willing to let the world see him beg. She hated him for it, and yet she loved him even more for breaking. At last her lips trembled as she whispered, "Adam, you are impossible." He squeezed her hand harder. "Does that mean you'll stay?" The silence stretched, the crowd holding its breath. Clara's chest rose and fell as she looked into his eyes, and at last she gave the smallest nod. Yes. Applause erupted. Cheers echoing through the terminal, strangers wiping tears as Adam stood pulling Clara into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise he had finally spoken. No more running, no more fear, just love laid bare in the most public of places. And for the first time, Clara believed, maybe, just maybe, this story was not ending, but only beginning. The applause from the airport still echoed in Clara's mind long after the crowd had dispersed. Strangers had cheered their kiss, cameras had caught every second, and by nightfall the internet was already ablaze with headlines about the ruthless CEO who had knelt in front of a woman and begged her to stay. Adam Smith's name was trending, but Clara's heart was heavy because she knew words were easy and promises could vanish like smoke. She needed proof that this time he would not run. Adam seemed to know it too. The very next morning he appeared at her door, not in his usual polished armor but in simple clothes, his hair unruly, his face tired yet determined. "Come with me," he said. "No explanations." Clara frowned, suspicious, but something in his eyes told her to follow. He drove her across the city, past the glass towers and into quieter streets until they reached a building that looked nothing like his empire. Bright Futures Community Center. Clara read aloud as she stepped out. Inside, the air was filled with laughter and chatter, children running through the halls, volunteers stacking boxes of supplies. An elderly woman waved the moment she saw Adam. "So you finally decided to show up," she teased Clara, froze, staring. Adam bent to hug the woman warmly. "Miss Hargrove," he introduced this woman. "Saved me when I was 12, when my mother died, and my father drowned himself in work. This was the only place where I belonged." Clara's chest tightened as she listened. Adam rolled up his sleeves and joined a group of teenagers struggling over math problems, his voice calm, patient. His eyes lit with a softness Clara had never seen before. The children laughed at his dry jokes. They clung to him as if he were more than just a man in a suit. Clara watched, stunned. The man who had crushed her with a resignation letter was also this man, a mentor, a protector, a soul who had not forgotten where he came from. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Adam walked her back to the car, his voice low. I didn't bring you here to impress you. I brought you here so you'd see every part of me, not just the CEO, not just the man who makes mistakes, but the man who wants to try again with you. Clara blinked back tears, the walls around her heart trembling. She whispered, You can't just erase the hurt with one gesture. Adam, he nodded. I know, that's why I won't stop proving it every day until you believe me. Over the next weeks, he kept his word. Adam shifted his life in ways no one expected. He canceled meetings to walk her home. He brought her coffee before she even asked. He sat with her during long translation nights, not saying much, just being there. Every action whispered the words he still struggled to say. Clara began to see it. This was not the man who ran. This was a man learning to stay, yet suspense still lingered one evening. Clara felt faint nausea rising until she nearly collapsed. Adam rushed her to the doctor, fear breaking through his usual composure. The tests were quick, the doctor's smile warm. Congratulations, Miss Cole. You're pregnant. Clara froze, the world spinning around her. Adam's hand gripped hers tightly, his eyes wide in shock, then filling with something she had never seen before, joy. When they left the hospital, he stopped her in the hallway, his voice unsteady but fierce. Not just for the baby, Clara, but because I love you. Marry me again, this time not in desperation but with certainty. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, Prove it. Adam smiled through the tremor in his voice. I will, and for the first time she believed he just might. The morning of the wedding dawned with silver clouds rolling across the sky. Clara stood in front of the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the veil. Aurora fussed with the bouquet, whispering, He is already pacing like a caged lion. Lara laughed softly, imagining Adam stalking the garden, counting every chair, every ribbon, making sure perfection ruled even on a day that belonged to chaos and love. Her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and joy, because this was no longer about contracts or running away. This was about forever. In the garden, guests whispered excitedly. The same CEO who once ruled boardrooms with iron silence was now waiting beneath an arch of lilies, his tie perfect, his posture stiff, but his eyes restless when Clara stepped into view. The world seemed to stop. Adam's jaw clenched, his mask threatening to crack as emotion flooded through him. She walked toward him, each step erasing the distance that once divided them. The vows were raw. Clara's voice shook, but she did not hold back. She spoke of the man who had tested her, pushed her, doubted her, and yet still chose her. The man who had once built walls but now knelt in an airport full of strangers. Adam's words came rough but steady. He spoke of the fear that had caged him, the ghost of Sophie, the pain he had carried like armor, and how Clara had broken through it all, not by force but by refusing to leave when he was at his worst, when the officiant declared them husband and wife. Adam pulled her into a kiss, fierce and unrestrained laughter and cheers filled the garden. But to Clara, it felt like the quietest, most certain moment of her life. Months passed and the pregnancy grew heavier with each day. Adam hovered constantly at her side, fussing over every detail. He brought her water before she asked, read parenting books late at night, and attended every appointment as if it were a board meeting that would decide his future. The once untouchable CEO had become a man utterly devoted, terrified, and thrilled in equal measure. Clara teased him often, but her heart melted every time she caught him staring at her belly, whispering promises to the life inside. Then came the night of the storm. The hospital room echoed with the sound of Clara's labored breathing. Adam gripped her hand, whispering encouragement. Though sweat drenched his brow, she screamed through the pain and cursed him for ever touching her. But his eyes were full of awe, not fear. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Adam's body shook with relief. The doctor smiled. It's a girl, Clara sobbed as the tiny bundle was placed in her arms. Adam leaned close, tears streaming down his face, whispering, She is perfect. You are perfect. In that moment, the ruthless CEO was gone forever. He was only a husband and a father, holding the pieces of his heart that he once thought lost. He kissed Clara's forehead, then the baby's, whispering, Welcome to the world. My Princess. Clara smiled through exhaustion, her voice soft. See, Adam, you didn't run this time. He held them both tighter. Never again. As dawn broke, the storm eased, leaving the city washed clean in pale light in the quiet of the hospital room. Adam looked at his wife and daughter and realized the final truth. Power and empires could be rebuilt, fortunes could rise and fall. But this love, this family was the only legacy that mattered, and in his arms he held the proof that he had finally chosen not fear, not control, but forever.